Hello there, my name is Payal Naraine and welcome to this video series. यहाँ हम कवर कर रहे हैं पूनम दलाल दहिया की एंशिएंट एंड मेडिवल इंडिया की थर्ड एडिशन, जो कि लेटेस्ट एडिशन है. इस किताब को हम थ्रूली रीड करेंगे और जहाँ ज़रूरत पड़ेगी वहाँ हम साथ ही साथ यूपीएससी एंड स्टेट सर्विसेज में आए हुए प्रीवियस ईयर के क्वेश्चंस भी डिस्कस करेंगे. एंड इस सीरीज़ में वीडियोज़ लगभग 30 to 35 मिनट्स के होंगे, बट इफेक्टिव होंगे. और हम ऑलमोस्ट 40 to 45 लेक्चर्स में ये पूरी किताब कवर करेंगे. और अगर आपने ये सीरीज़ 3 to 4 टाइम्स देख ली तो बिल्कुल ये किताब आपके दिमाग में छप जाएगी. एंड ट्रस्ट मी, आपकी एक्यूरेसी भी काफ़ी इंक्रीज़ हो जाएगी. साथ ही साथ आपका रिवीजन भी काफ़ी आसान हो जाएगा. सो अगर आपको रिवीजन के साथ साथ वैल्यू एडिशन भी करना है तो ये सीरीज़ पूरी फॉलो करें. आपको बस आपके पास ये किताब रखकर मुझे सुनना है एंड मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट पॉइंट्स मार्क करने हैं. So without any further delay, let's get started. Hello there, welcome back to the channel Ghatna Sutra. यहाँ हम कवर कर रहे हैं पूनम दलाल दहिया की एंशिएंट एंड मेडिवल इंडिया थर्ड एडिशन, जो कि लेटेस्ट एडिशन है. और हमने लास्ट वीडियो में कवर कर लिया था पॉलिटिकल लाइफ ऑफ लेटर वैदिक आर्यंस, एंड नाउ वी आर गोइंग टू रीड अबाउट सोशल लाइफ ऑफ लेटर वैदिक आर्यंस. सो लेट्स गेट स्टार्टेड. Social life of later Vedic Aryans. The family still remains the basic unit of Vedic society. However, its composition underwent a change. The later Vedic family became large enough to be called a joint family, with 3 or 4 generations living together. The rows of huts discovered at Atranjikhera and at Achichatra, both in western Uttar Pradesh, shows that these were meant for communal feeding or for cooking the food of large families. Certain aspects related to later Vedic society. In the family, a patrimonial authority of father system developed, and women were generally confined to household chores and subordinated position. As compared to the Rig Vedic age, women lost importance in the society. And there have been reference to rare instances of sati and child marriage. In one text, women have been counted as a vice along with dice and wine. In other texts, daughters has been said to be the source of all sorrows. Assemblies were then dominated by nobles and affluent men and women, and no longer permitted to attend assemblies. One of the most important change from the Rig Vedic society was the rise and growth of social differentiation in the form of Varna system. The later Vedic society was clearly divided into 4 Varnas: Brahmanas, Rajanas or Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras. The increasing cult of sacrifices added enormously to the power of the Brahmanas, while the position of Shudras deteriorated as they were ordered to be in the service of the 3 upper Varnas and were thus denied almost all the privileges. Even they could not recite the Gayatri Mantra. Another important institution that began to take shape was ashrama, or the different stages of life: brahmacharya, student life; grihastha, householder; vanaprastha, hermitage; and the 4th stage, sannyasa. Together with varna, later Vedic society came to be known as varna ashrama dharma society. Though ashrama, or the 4 stages of life, were prescribed but were not religiously followed, it is pertinent to note here that the first reference of ashrama system is found in Chandogya Upanishads, but a reference is limited to just first 3 ashrams. However, the first reference of all the 4 ashrams is found in Jabala Upanishad. The upper 3 classes, known as Dvija, twice born, discriminated against both Shudras and the Chandalas. Education was largely confined to Dvija caste and began with the investitures ceremony, that is, wearing this sacred thread, Upanyayas, although women were also initiated at times. This can be construed as the beginning of the imposition of disabilities on the Shudras, as well as the beginning of the concept of ritual pollution. The institution of Gotra appeared in the later Vedic culture. Literally, it means cow pen, or the place where cattle belonging to a whole clan are kept, but in course of time, it meant descent from a common ancestor. Marriage between a person of the same Gotra was forbidden. There were legendary seers such as Kashyapa, Vasishtha, Bhirgu, Gautama, Bhardwaj, Atri, Vishwamitra, and Agastya, after whom the Gotras were named. Kshatriyas and Vaishyas took the same Gotra name of the families of Brahmanas who traditionally performed their domestic rituals. There is a mention of Chandrayana penance for men marrying women of the same Gotra. Caste exogamy was extensively practiced and a rigid social hierarchy developed, which restricted the social mobility of the earlier period. Interestingly, certain craft groups managed to attain higher status. For example, Rathakars, the chariot makers, had the right to wear the sacred thread. Here you can see the later Vedic caste system. It starts with Brahmins, priests, Kshatriya warriors and rulers, and Vaishyas, skilled traders, merchants and minor officers, Shudras, unskilled workers, Parihas, Harijans, outcast, untouchable children of God. Later Vedic age of economy. The economic activities of later Vedic period were quite diversified. Agriculture, pastoralism, craft production and trade contributed to the economic development. The predominantly pastoral society of early Vedic time had become agricultural, and agriculture emerged as the chief means of livelihood of the later Vedic people. The Satpatha Brahmana mentioned rituals related to the plowing undertaken by the kings, and this suggested the importance given to the cultivation by the rulers and the shift to agriculture to support the increasing population. The forests were cleared by burning the trees, which is also mentioned in Satpatha Brahmana. Ruler Vedya Madhava burned the forest between river Saraswati and river Sedanira or Gandak. Cultivation was done by the plough and mixed farming. Cultivation along with herding was one of the prime occupation of the later Vedic period. So here we'll talk about certain aspects related to the later Vedic period. और इसे आप ध्यान दीजिएगा इसके ऊपर RES/RTS के एग्जाम में 2021 में सवाल पूछा गया था. So just star mark this. Let's start. Certain aspects related to later Vedic period. The land was still communally owned, over which the Vish clan had many participatory rights. But it was recognized as property, and then the head of the household who owned the land was termed as Grahapati. Rice, vrihi and wheat, godhum, became the staple diet of the people. And apart from barley, later Vedic people also started growing wheat, rice, pulses, lentils, millets, sugarcane. Also, with the beginning of food production, agriculture produce began to be offered in the ritual. The item of dana and dakshina included cooked rice, tila, from which the first widely used vegetable food oil was derived, increasingly came to be used in rituals. The society was largely rural. However, towards the end of the period, there are traces of the beginning of urbanism, as Nagar in the sense of town is mentioned in the Taittiriya Aranyakas. The main factor in the expansion of the Aryan culture during the later Vedic period was the beginning of the use of iron, which was introduced around 1000 BCE and is mentioned as Krishna Ayas or Shama Ayas. The later Vedic culture is also called as PGW, iron phase culture, as a particular kind of pottery, painted graveware was used during that phase. Diverse arts and craft proliferated during the later Vedic age, and craft specialization took deep roots. When compared to early Vedic period, since more occupational groups are mentioned in the period, for instance, bow makers, rope makers, arrow makers, hide dressers, stone breakers, physician, goldsmith, and astrologers are some of the specialized professionals group mentioned in the text. Tin, lead, silver, iron, gold, bronze, and copper were known to later Vedic period. They were probably good smith and smelters, as a lot of copper objects have been found at PGW sites. People has obtained knowledge of glass manufacturing too. Shrestins indicated the guilds or organization of merchants. Exchange was still via barter, but nishika was used as a convenient unit of value, although not as a typical currency. Wagon drawn by oxen were probably the most used mode of transport. Unlike the Rigvedic age, where only voluntary offerings were taken and per se no revenue collection was done, in the later Vedic age, collection of taxes and tribute was made mandatory, and Bali thus became a regular tax and was collected by Bali Sadhyaksh, while the treasures were known as Sangrihitris. Bhaga signifies king's share in agriculture produce, which was collected by Bhagha Dugas, while Bhoga signifies ceremonial gift. It is equally interesting to note that Vaishyas appear to be the only tribute payers in the later Vedic time. Later Vedic people were acquainted with four types of pottery: painted grey ware, black and red ware, black slipped ware, red ware. Later Vedic age religion. Changes in the material life naturally resulted in the change in their attitude towards God and goddesses as well. The two most important Rigvedic gods, Indra and Agni, lost their importance, and instead of them, Prajapati, the creator, became supreme. Some of the other minor gods became prominent, such as Vishnu, conceived as the preserver and protector of people, and Rudra, the god of animal. Idolatry appeared in later Vedic phase, and just as the society was divided into later Vedic phase in terms of social classes, similarly some of the social orders too adopted their own deities. For example, Pushan, who was supposed to look after cattle, came to be regarded as the god of Shudras. The later Vedic culture was focused on the centrality of the cult of sacrifice. Ritual and sacrifice became more important and elaborated, and assumed both public and domestic character. There was an increase in frequency and numbers of yajnas, which generally involved the killing of animals on the large scale and the destruction of cattle wealth. This was probably the result of growing importance of the class of Brahmins and their effort to maintain their supremacy in the changing society. The yajnas brought to them a large amount of wealth in the form of dana and dakshina. Some of the important yajnas were Ashwamedha, Vajpaya, and Rajasuya, etc. The purpose of these yajna was twofold. Firstly, it established the authority of the chief over the people, and secondly, it reinforced the territorial aspect of the polity, since people from all over the kingdom were invited to these sacrifices. Philosophical dimension of religion emerged during later Vedic age, and concepts like heaven, hell, rebirth, soul, transmigration, and salvation attained popularity. However, towards the end of the later Vedic age, a strong reaction began to emerge against the priestly domination, against cults and sacrifices, especially in the land of Panchala and Vaideha, where around 600 BCE the Upanishads were compiled and later also led to the development of heterodox faith such as Buddhism and Jainism, which emphasize correctly human behavior and discipline. Comparative analysis of Rigvedic age and later Vedic age. Rigvedic age. Time period 1500 to 1000 BCE. Area. The core geographical area of the Rigvedic text corresponds to the eastern Afghanistan, Punjab, western Uttar Pradesh. Political sphere. The chief was known as Rajan or Gopati and was selected among the clansmen. His office was thus not hereditary. The war was primarily fought for the protection of cattle, that is cow. It was the age of Janas. The Rajan was helped in his administrative task by the tribal assemblies, known as Sabha, Samiti, or the Vidhata, and thus these assemblies in a way limited the power of the chiefs. There was no taxation system, as only voluntary offering were taken, and per se no revenue collection was done. Social sphere. Society was simple and largely egalitarian, and wherein there was a social mobility and absence of strict social hierarchy. The society was not divided on caste lines, and occupation was not based on birth. Women enjoyed equal rights and had access to tribal assemblies like sabhas and samitis. Women received education. Child marriages, sati system did not exist. Prevalence of widow remarriages. Economic sphere. Many pastoral economies supplemented by agriculture. Barley, Yava was the only grain grown. Cattle was the chief measure of wealth, and there was no concept of private property based on the land ownership. The Rig Vedic people knew of a metal called ayas, which was either copper or bronze, but they had no knowledge of iron. Religious sphere. There was neither temple nor idol during the Rig Vedic period. The Rig Vedic people venerated natural forces and worshipped primarily deities of Indra, Agni, Varuna, Soma, etc. Rituals and sacrifice were not much significance to their religious practice. Now let's talk about the later Vedic age. Time period, it started from 1000 to 500 BCE. Area. The core geographical area of later Vedic text corresponds to the Kuru Panchala region, which comprises of Indo-Gangetic Divide and the Upper Ganga Valley. Political sphere. Hereditary kingship emerged and the chief grew at the expense of the tribal peasantry. There was also emergence of idols of the divine nature of kingship. There was no longer fought for cows. The wars were no longer fought for cows, but for territories. The term Rashtra first appeared in this period. In the later stage, it was slowly turning into the age of Janapadas. The tribal assemblies lost their privileged status and gradually became subordinated to king. Instead of them, now emerged an elaborated administrative machinery, headed by the key officials who assisted the king in administrative work. In the later Vedic age, taxation system developed, and collection of tax and tributes was made mandatory and were done by Sangrihitas. Social sphere. Emergence of rigid class distinctions and rise and growth of the social differentiation in the form of Varna system. The later Vedic society was divided into 4 Varna: Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras, and there was absent of social mobility. The caste system now became hereditary, and thus the occupation was based on birth. There was a significant decline in the status of women as they assumed subordinate position to men and lost access to both sabhas and samitis. Education was restricted to women, and only few women received education. There were rare instances of sati and child marriages. Widows were not allowed to remarry. Economic sphere. Agriculture became chief occupation, supplemented by pastoralism, along with other different occupations. Other grains like rice, wheat, millet, sugarcane, etc. were grown along with barley. Cattle lost its importance and land emerged as important measures of wealth. The later Vedic period was the beginning of use of iron called Krishnayas, which helped a lot in the expansion of the Aryan culture. The later Vedic period is also known as iron-faced culture. Religious sphere. Idolatry and temple worship appeared in the later stage of the Vedic period. The 2 important Rig Vedic gods, Indra and Agni, lost their importance, and instead some minor gods such as Rudra and some new gods such as Prajapati and Vishnu became supreme during the later Vedic period. The later Vedic culture was focused on the centrality of the cult of sacrifice and was immensely based on both priestly domination and ritual dogmas. So here we are going to talk about some key concepts and their sources. अब हाँ, यहाँ पे आप इम्पॉर्टेंट मार्क कर लीजिएगा क्योंकि UPSC की एग्जामिनेशन में 2014 में पूछा गया था सत्यमेव जयते के बारे में, एंड जो सोर्स है उसके बारे में RTS के एग्जाम में 2016 में पूछा गया था. तो मार्क दिस इम्पॉर्टेंट एंड मेक श्योर दैट यू रिमेंबर दीज थिंग्स. की कॉन्सेप्ट्स. गोत्रा. सोर्स इज अथर्व वेदा. पुरुषा शुक्ताहाइम, fourfold division of society, is mentioned in Rig Veda 10th mandal. First 3 ashram, brahmacharya, grahastha and vanaprastha, it's mentioned in Chandogya Upanishad. 4 ashrams, brahmacharya, grahastha, vanaprasthas and sannyas, mentioned in Jabala Upanishads. Samsara, transmigration of soul, is mentioned in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Sabha Samiti as the twin daughter of Prajapati is mentioned in Atharva Veda. Satyama Vijayate is mentioned in Mundak Upanishad. Doctrine of Trimurti is mentioned in Maitrayani Upanishad. Mention of the Great Flood is mentioned in Satpata Brahmanas. Kshatriya precedence over Brahmanas is mentioned in Atriya Brahmanas. Mention of the eastern and western sea is mentioned in Satpata Brahmanas. Origin of the universe is mentioned in Rig Veda 10th Mandal. Now, do you know, unlike Shruti text, Vedas, Samitis, remember text includes the Puranas, epics such as Ramayana, the Mahabharata, Vedanga, Nitishtra and Dharmashastra. The Kali age is believed to start from the day Lord Krishna died about 20 years after the Mahabharata war. The Ramayana has many versions. Different versions have different beginning and ending, such as the Machurya of Vimlasuri in Prakrit is a Jaina version in which Ravana is killed by Lakshmana and not by Rama, as Rama, being a true Jaina, embodies non-violence. The Dashratha Jatakas in Pali, a Buddhist version. The Irama Vatram in Tamil by Kamban. The Ram Charitamanas in Hindi by Tulsidas. There are primarily 4 families of language spoken in India. Indo-European, spoken by around 75%. It includes Hindi, Bengali, Marathi, Urdu, Gujarati, Oriya, Punjabi, Assamese, Sindhi, Nepali, Kashmiri, etc. Dravidian, spoken by around 22%. It includes Telugu, Tamil, Kannada, Malayalam and Tulu. Largely spoken in South India except Gondi, Central India. Bharahui, Balochistan, Pakistan and Malto, Rajmahal Hills, Eastern India. Austro-Asiatic, spoken by around 1%. It includes Kasi, Khasi, Santali, Mundari, Ho, Savara, Kharia, etc. Tibeto-Burmese, spoken by around 1%. It includes Manipuri, Bodo, Tripuri, Garo, Lusai, Sema, Karbi, O, Adi, Nisi, etc. Classical Sanskrit refers to the language whose rules were codified by grammarian Panini in his famous volume Ashtadhyayi. Patanjali's Mahabhyasa is another important text of Sanskrit grammar. Tolkappiyam is the oldest surviving Tamil grammar. Among the Dravidian language, Tamil has the oldest literature, followed by Kannada. Pali and Prakrit, both like Sanskrit, belong to the Indo-Iranian branch of the Indo-European family. Oldest surviving Prakrit grammar is Prakrita Praksha of Vararuchi. Magadhi and Sauraseni are the dialect of Prakrit. Now we are going to start with the first chapter, Mahajanapadas of the Indo-Gangetic Plain, from 600 to 300 BCE. एंड यहाँ पे आप इसको हैश मार्क करिए बिकॉज इसके ऊपर सवाल आया था UPSC 2023 मेंस में. सो मार्क दिस इज एन इम्पॉर्टेंट टॉपिक. Okay, let's start with the fourth chapter.